What do you do if you don't have the information you need to make a good decision? Well, there are several different ways that you might deal with it. One is to presume that you already know that things haven't changed much, or to fall back on whatever information you had before that formed whatever prejudices you might have, that this is the way things work. In a rapidly changing time, that is simply not an option. Most information that we get about the state of the economy, etc., is old. There's an old joke that in the Federal Reserve that you're basically driving a car with a muddy windshield, broken windshield wipers, and all you have is a rear view mirror. This is true for actually a lot of people. The more things change, the more you need to know what's going on in front of you, the more difficult that becomes. Now, if there's one thing that's going to happen through this whole virus crisis that we can be sure of is that pretty much everything could change. Not everything will, but everything certainly could. And a lot of things will. The economy itself may have been broken. Jobs, as we know them, have been changing rapidly for a long time. And of course, our relationship to each other because of health issues. It's going to be different. So, how do we know how things are changing? Where do we get that information? If you are an authoritarian government, okay, think about it for a moment. You're on the top, you're in your little palace or whatever, and information is power. Knowing what's going on gives you the power to make good decisions that benefit you probably. But, if you care about the people to some extent or whatever, you might make good decisions on behalf of the people. But leave that aside. At the very top, controlling information is absolutely critical. And we see this in authoritarian governments all around the world. Most of them lie about nearly everything. Just try to get good economic statistics from nations that are not truly open societies. And this is how an open society is critical for a functioning free market. If the only people that have the information are at the top, then how do people that are actually making the economy function get the information they need? And indeed, this is the net value of market forces, is that they transmit information. If that information is stuck at the top, well, then you have a problem. Rapidly changing times seem to favor authoritarianism. Somebody has control over things, right? It's not all chaotic. Somebody has it according to plan. This is both a political philosophy that, can't we have somebody who's in charge of things to fix things and just make it better? It's also the root of conspiracy theories. Isn't there somebody in charge who's making all of this happen? It comes down to information, and that information quality concentrated at the top makes authoritarian governments even more brittle. They are incapable of changing. In a time of rapid change, this should be when the developed world, particularly the United States, has its moment to shine. But it doesn't feel like it sometimes, does it? The short answer is that we need to be able to consume information more efficiently, be able to find it. Well, there's information all over the place, but we also need to be able to process it. Some of this information, I have argued before in my previous series, can be provided by the government to make markets more efficient. There are certain key markets that are just hopelessly stuck. They tend to be sticky. Foreign exchange and labor markets are key among them. You have various pressures that come to bear, but there's all this overhead and all this background, and things don't move until the pressures become very great, and then they jump suddenly. We're living through an event that is going to cause a lot of markets to jump because the pressures are going to be unleashed, sort of like an earthquake. Labor is one of the key ones. There is a role in the government giving that information to the people who make the decisions. But an authoritarian government wants to control it all. Even if it seems like authoritarian governments are winning, they're not. The goal for a developed nation that has a free and open society has to be that information reaches everybody. It's what the market the market provides more efficiently, and it's what the market needs. It's an endless cycle. Now, authoritarian governments do a lot more than just lie about everything. Uh, we see on social media, for example, influencing American policy through direct propaganda arms. There are many countries that do this: Russia, China, Iran, but there are others that have their own propaganda arms that are more or less active depending on what's going on. How do you respond to this? Well, you might say to yourself, it's really easy to spot this kind of thing, this top-down controlling the flow of information. We have the good information, we're going to put out bad information to everybody else. It's one approach. It's not that easy to spot. Fake newspapers or news organizations get set up all the time. There are several techniques that I use to follow this. And I first became aware of, say, the Russian organization back in 2014 when I talked on my own blog about Ukraine. They were still kind of getting set up or whatever, but I was targeted. And by targeted, I mean there were a lot of comments left that were clearly not from Americans or not from the developed world in origin. Now, if you're looking at purely American focus, one of the things that you can tell right away is if you look carefully at grammar. I don't usually try to be a grammar Nazi about things, but there are certain mistakes, well, everybody makes, and there are certain mistakes only foreigners make. The use of articles like the and the use of prepositional phrases. These are key things to look out for. Another interesting thing is the word stuff. You know that's singular? Most people who learn English want to make it stuffs. Things like that, mistakes that no American would make. If somebody is masquerading as an American, but they make certain mistakes, well, they could be a recent immigrant, that's true. But it's just something to keep an eye out for. The other thing is that every single news story that seems important, it's worth spending just a little bit of time taking the headline out of it and doing a search on it and see if that story is picked up by anybody else, or if the story has a completely different spin somewhere else. That is the best way I know to counter all of this. But we do have to counter it, and we are bombarded with misinformation. It's sort of the flip side of controlling the good information. You send out the bad. In the end, developing the skills to determine what is vital information is number one for developed nations, to continue changing rapidly and dealing with change. An authoritarian government is inherently brittle. We need the skills to be able to process information. But it starts with an understanding that there is a lot of bad information out there. Much of it is deliberately created, and we can't help but run into it. And for all the conspiracy theorists and people who are against the US government for any one reason or the other, yeah, they're easy ones to feed stuff to. We have the confirmational bias that if people want to believe that our government is somehow evil, run by an evil cabal, there are plenty of foreign governments who love to feed that. So, what do? Watch for grammar, do your own search for anything that seems interesting, and I would say never take anything at face value. In the end, a truly market-based system is going to win out. It just doesn't seem like it when times are turbulent. We want to have more control, but the answer is usually to give up control. And if our governments are going to do anything useful for us, it's going to be to encourage the skills to make use of information where they have them make the most sense, and to provide as much timely information as possible about where the economy is going. Not just the dollars and cents of it, but the skills that are needed for people to make decisions about employment, about where to live, what skills to develop, what sorts of things they can do. Labor markets are going to change very rapidly, and they're going to jump. They always do. One day you're going to wake up and poof, something is gone, or something new has replaced it, ideally. Authoritarian governments do not have an advantage in this situation. It only seems like it. And it's the more that we operate from a top down model ourselves, the more it's going to seem like those on a top down model have the benefit, the ones that have the rigid top down model. It's simply not true. Information is what makes markets function properly and helps us to deal with change. But that gets us into the topic of change management as a concept. And that's what I'll be talking about next. Thank you.